Hi there, you're watching Midwinter Minis, my name's Guy.
And I'm Hatty, and in this video we're going to show you some really simple, striking alternative Tyranid colour schemes that will not only help you get your army painted up fast, but also make them really stand out on the tabletop.
Also, this video has been kindly sponsored by NordVPN, but we'll talk about that more later. Right now though, Tyranid. We've tried to simplify each scheme as much as possible with only a handful of steps to get your core infantry looking great, and then we'll show you some additional steps that you can do if you want to spend more time on them or to make your big monsters or characters look a bit more special. We picked up the Leviathan box on release day, and we've got the old Tyranid Combat Patrol box to paint up too, so let us know in the comments which colour scheme you think the Midwinter Minis in-house Tyranid army should use.
We're also going to be using both brand new Leviathan Termagant models and the 23-year-old plastic models too. They both look great, so why not?
Right then, let's get going. I'll go first with Worm-Nids. First up, superglue random small rocks and debris to the large armour plates. Don't cover them all up, just a few here and there will be fine. Pop a couple on the base too. Next, grab your favourite texture paint. Add some sand or grit to add even more texture if you like, and paint this over the armour plates. And also on the base to keep things thematic. If you got some on the smooth skin parts, wipe it away with a moist brush. And when that's dry, at this point prime your model. Either white or grey should work fine. Next we'll need a rosy flesh colour. Bugman's Glow works really well for this. Paint the whole model, every little bit. Brush, airbrush, spray can, it doesn't really matter. Now lighten up the smooth parts of the bodies with a rough dry brush using a pale flesh colour. This is the kind of coverage you're looking for. Right, let's make this a bit more raw and gross looking by thinning down the contrast paint of a lupus pink with an equal amount of your favourite thinner and slop this all over the fleshy bits. Now it's time to base coat all of the armour panels, earthy bits and your base with your favourite muddy dark brown. Bring out a little bit of texture on the dirt with a dry brush of a lighter brown or a khaki paint, and if you can be bothered, a very sparing dry brush of an off-white, although this isn't really essential. For your rank and file, now all you want to do is add some random patches of earth tone washes or contrast paints on the earthy bits, and grab the lighter flesh tone colour you used to dry brush the bodies before and thin it nicely, and then add some evenly spaced lines along any smooth bits like the tails and arms to add that segmented worm look. You can also use this colour to add some quick edge highlights to any of the facial features you want to bring out and any fancy bits on your characters. It looks pretty cool, huh? Awesome, unique rank and file with very little effort. If you want to spend a bit more time and make them extra gross, especially for your characters, you can add cut up grass tufts on the bases, and also on top of the muddy armour plates. We want these to look like they've just risen out of the ground after all. To make the bodies look slimy and gross, we can add 1 or 2 coats of gloss varnish, and to make the dirt look more realistic, we can paint some matte varnish onto it. Painting the varnish on the tufts will also make them look more trampled and realistic too. Tidy up the base rims, and you're done. I really like this scheme. What do you think? Too early to pick a favourite obviously, but I think this one looks pretty awesome. Right, Hatty, you're up.
Okay, I'm going to start with the classic and then get weirder as I go on. My first scheme is going to be a speed paint take on the Xenomorph from Alien. To fit the setting, I wanted to give him a spaceshipy base, so I filed the texture on the plastic base a bit smoother, and then added some little bits to it, like a snipped up cable tie, some chopped up sprue for debris, and some little bits of floral wire to look like cables. This stuff is really easy to twist into any shape you like, and is really cheap, great for terrain building or base making. That'll do for the base. Spray the whole thing with a black primer, and then the first paint we're going to use is a browny grey. Storm Vermin Fur is pretty good for this. Dry brush the whole underbody, nice and subtle, we don't want anything too bright for now. I then added a little bit of Screaming Skull to the Storm Vermin Fur to lighten it up, and then added a more careful dry brush to the edges of the sharp body shapes. I then went back to the black paint to tidy up the armour plates and carapace. To make the black more dynamic, but with a more bluey tone than the body, I used Dark Reaper to do a thick highlight following the ridges on the armour. You could also dry brush this instead, especially on the newer, more detailed models. Then, just a tiny thin touch of a lighter blue-grey, Fenrisian grey is nice, to lighten up the most prominent sticky out bits. The Xenomorphs in the films have really bright silver fangs, so I'm going to use a nice bright chrome looking paint for the teeth and claws. And then a darker, more dull metallic colour for the spaceship base. Now you've got your base coats down, time to give everything a black wash. Good old Nuln Oil would be perfect. And then finally, to make it look all gross and shiny like it is in the film, let's use a coat of gloss varnish. Depending on which varnish you use, you might want to use 2 coats. And then finally a black base rim and we're done. This scheme will look amazing when you have dozens and dozens of models on tabletop. As the models have to be quite dark and monotone, you could spice up the bases a little bit with coloured cables, transfers, anything you like really. Even so, I think it looks pretty cool as it is. If you're looking for something more colourful, I think Guy's next one will make your eyes explode.
Okay, if you've watched Midwinter Minis for a while, you'll know I absolutely love retro Warhammer, especially the stuff from the mid-90s when I got into the hobby myself. I thought it would be pretty fun to 2nd edition these brand new 10th edition models, especially considering that 2023 is the 30th anniversary of when Tyranids hit the tabletop in Warhammer 40k. But instead of slaving away using old paints, I'll be using all the modern tips and tricks I can to achieve the 90s look really fast. Obligatory sand-coated base. Liquid superglue is faster and more durable than PVA glue if you want to get loads and loads of models painted fast. Coat a bit on the base, sprinkle the sand on, and just keep going until the base is covered. Rules is rules. 90s style models get primed white. No exceptions. We'll slightly update the old techniques by doing some underpainting. First, add a black wash all over the model. It should sink into the recesses and make them darker. Once that's dried, grab your favourite white and roughly dry brush all over the model to bring back the vibrancy to the prominent sticky out bits and flat areas. First step, a red contrast paint. Blood Angel's red is nice, Bile red is good, either would be fine, but I'll mix the two together to get the best of both. Paint this on all the fleshy under bits of the model, avoiding the armour plates, guns and talons. If you do paint any of these bits by accident, no worries, just grab your white paint and touch them up again. Now, a vibrant green contrast for the guns. Hexwraith Flame works really well. Carefully apply this to the weapons for that authentic, ridiculous 90s vibe. Next, Storm Fiend for all the claws and talons, and also the armour plates on the heads. And lastly, Skeleton Horde to paint the rest of the bony carapace. Now, OG Goblin Green isn't getting any easier to find, but there are some pretty similar modern alternatives. One of the closest I've found is Tank Green from TT Combat. Give the base a thorough coat, and then, using your favourite yellow paint, dry brush the texture of the sand to give it that lush, green, grassy look that so beautifully captures the nightmarish grimdark future of the 41st millennium. And there you go, in just a few quick steps you can have a pretty good likeness of the retro bright painting style, but we can get a little closer if you've got a bit more time to spare. Literally all I'm doing in the next few steps is adding a little bit of white into each of those contrast paints we just used to create a more opaque, lighter version of the colour, and then using a detail brush to do some quick, dirty edge highlights, and also adding some striations to the carapace too. And that's it. If you fancy going all 1993 on your 2023 models, give this method a shot. I really like it, although I would say that obviously.
Haha, I wasn't even born in 1993. But you know what did come out in 93? Jurassic Park. And it's given me a fun idea for a Tyranid colour scheme. Let's do everyone's favourite raptor, Blue, from Jurassic World. Let's give her a generic earthy base that we can add some foliage to later. Just a big slop of texture paint and a couple of little stones will be fine. Priming grey on this one is a no-brainer. Mechanica Standard Grey from the Rattle Can has a bit of a green tinge to it, which will actually work in my favour for this scheme. A heavy dry brush of Storm Vermin Fur all over will help bring out the details and texture, even on an older model like this one. I then mixed Screaming Skull into the Storm Vermin Fur again, about 50-50, and did a lighter dry brush again all over. Basically the same steps as a Xenomorph, but just more. Now let's make that fun blue stripe down her side. Starting with a bright off-white, like this Phantom Ivory, sketch out the rough shape of the stripe, trying to keep the edges rough and natural looking, not too clean. Stippling it on will stop obvious brush strokes being visible and keep it looking a bit more real. And while we've got this paint out, we can also use it for the teeth and tongue and any other little details you want to pick out. Next, we'll pick out the lovely bright blue streak, being careful to keep inside of the lighter area that we just sketched on. A contrast paint like Talisar Blue will be perfect here, because when it's dried we can go back and add a second coat, but in patches rather than all over, to give a more natural skin texture. I'll also plop it into the little ridgy bits I highlighted a minute ago to make the model a bit more colourful. I then used thinned Volupus Pink on the tongue, being careful not to touch the teeth, and then I used a bright yellow paint to paint the eyes. I also hit the area around the eye by mistake here, but I fixed it with a touch of Storm Vermin Fur again. The teeth were a little bit too bright for my liking, so I toned them down with some thinned black wash. Now let's quickly tackle the base. A rich green contrast paint like Creed Camo will tone the floor nicely, and then we'll use a little touch of dirty down moss to add a bit of variation. We've got some fun grass tufts with little yellow flowers on that I reckon will complement her eyes beautifully. And then a quick black base rim to finish the deal, and we're done. It's surprising how impressive this looks on the model for what little effort it took. And I reckon if you had a whole army of these, they would look amazing.
Man, I really want to watch Jurassic Park again now. Anyway, time for quick and easy colour scheme number 5, Demonic Lava Monsters. This one is probably the easiest but most striking of the lot. First up, don't even bother about any basing stuff just yet. Prime your model white. Once the primer is dry, slap on some vibrant yellow paint. Or if you don't want to spend a million years painting opaque yellow, just use ink. One coat and done. Now I'm going to add a couple of drops of Bile Red contrast to that yellow ink I just used to create a fiery orange, and then without even waiting for that yellow to dry properly, slap it on some random spots. Leave lots of yellow still visible though. When that step is dry, apply a gloss varnish all over the model and its base. You don't need an airbrush for this step, painting it on with a brush would be just fine. Now while you wait for that to dry, let's make some lava crust. If you have the paint Mordant Earth, I mean, that's perfect, just use that. But if you, like me, only have a Grelin Earth, you can darken it with black ink. You don't want to use too much ink as it'll change the way the paint crackles, just enough to darken it down to a charcoal off black. Now glob this on nice and thick all over the armor plates on the back, legs, head and guns, along the top of the tail, and also all over the base. After 20 minutes or so, when it's dried, you'll see that the paint has pulled back on itself, revealing yellowy orange cracks. You can then give the dried crust parts a quick dry brush with black to reinforce the contrast between the bright lava and the dark crust. If you want more cracks, don't be afraid to give the flakes a bit of a poke with a toothpick and they should widen up and flake away while retaining their cool texture. Now, for your swarm, you could just paint the rims and leave it here, but for your bigger models and monsters, you could try out these optional extras. Sink a bit of white ink into the deepest focal points of the bright lava bits, like the eyes, mouth, and random deep holes in the body. You can also carefully line the recesses between the armor panels if you fancy it. Now, if you have an airbrush, you can also puff a little bit of white ink around the brightest parts like the eyes and cool weapon bits to make them look a bit glowy. And then, either using a yellow wash or a thin contrast paint, you can either airbrush or paint on a yellow glaze over these newly painted white areas to make them a bit more fiery. You can make the transitions between dark and light areas a bit more interesting with random blobs of charcoal, black or grey paint too. Teeth will look pretty cool painted black in this scheme too. A black base rim, and you're done. Forget the subterranean nids, these monsters have been hiding under the planet's crust. And as I said, a really striking scheme that's a doddle to paint. Let me know in the comments which is your favourite so far, and which one you think we should use for the Midwinter Minis Tyranid army. And believe it or not, we've got 5 more fresh, hot colour schemes to show you. And speaking of hot, summer is here, and chances are that you're going to be out and about a bit more than usual. Maybe you've got a little trip or a full-on vacation booked. It sounds great, but have you considered sketchy public Wi-Fi? Well, with NordVPN, you won't have to worry about it. Picture this, you're sitting at a fun new cafe, enjoying an iced beverage and catching up on emails, but did you know that public Wi-Fi networks are a prime target for hackers and data collection? That's why you need a VPN. But hold on Guy, what is a VPN? It's a virtual private network that acts as a kind of magic middleman for your internet connection, encrypting and anonymizing literally everything you do online. And that's why I'll be trusting NordVPN for my summertime online security, and all year round for that matter. With NordVPN, you can stay connected, browse with confidence, and protect your personal data no matter where you are. For a limited time, if you sign up using my link, NordVPN's 2-year plan will be available at a massive discount, with an extra month for free. Unbeatable protection at an incredible price. Head to nordvpn.com/midwinterminis, sign up, and breathe easy, knowing that your personal info and sensitive data is secured no matter where summer takes you.
Okay, back to painting, scheme 6. I've always found it really cool that so many different animals, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and even plants can be affected by albinism, a congenital lack of melanin which gives albino creatures very pale, almost white hair, skin and scales, and striking pink or blue eyes. So why couldn't it affect a hive fleet of sci-fi aliens 40,000 years in the future? Fortunately, this is also a really easy paint scheme for your Tyranid army. Keeping it easy, let's add some texture paint to the base, and then prime it using Wraithbone, which is a creamy off-white. The first paint we'll use will be a nice warm light skin colour like Cadian flesh tone. Apply it kind of like the opposite of a highlight, painting it into all the deepest ridges and recesses on the armour plates, and then just a thin watery coat all over the fleshy body. Now grab Volupus Pink contrast paint, thin it down a bit, and again make a sort of low light by putting it into the very deepest recesses on the fleshy body, but this time avoiding the armour. Don't forget to put it on the tongue and the eyes though. Next I mixed Pink Horror and Cadian flesh tone about 50-50, keeping it very thin again, and then ran it into the deepest recesses on the armour plates. When that's dry, a dry brush of pale off-white like this Phantom Ivory all over, just to pick out some quick details. And then again we'll use Creed Camo on the base. This colour should complement the skin tone nicely. And then a black rim, a couple of grassy tufts, and he's done. I honestly thought this was going to be the worst of my colour schemes, but now it's done, I think it looks really cool, especially considering how easy it was to paint. An army like this would look really striking on your average 40k tabletop, given how dark and dingy most of the armies in Terrain tend to be.
Right, scheme number 7. In Warhammer 40k there's a thing called Deathworlds, which are basically planets that are deemed so dangerous due to being covered in carnivorous plants and teeming with monstrous native wildlife that they're not worth the hassle for the Imperium of Man to colonise. It kind of makes sense that a hive fleet of Tyranids could use one of these as their home planet, surely. So let's create a scheme of wild, Deathworld jungle Tyranids. Head to your local pet store and grab one of these cheap plastic aquarium plants. This one costs £2 and will provide enough foliage for an entire army. Snip off whatever shapes take your fancy and stick the leaves down in layers on the armour plates on the model's back and head. You might want to use a toothpick to press them down instead of your fingers, as you'll probably end up in a bit of a gluey mess. Give the bases a suitably rough, earthy texture with little stones and texture paint, and then prime the whole model white. We want this to be super vibrant. Use your most ridiculously over-the-top green acrylic paint or contrast paint to cover the entire model. And the base. Paintbrush, airbrush, it doesn't really matter, just paint absolutely everything. Now with your brightest yellow paint, either dry brush from the top down or airbrush in a zenithal pattern pointing downwards. Or do both like me. This looks almost radioactive. Now let's base coat any areas we'd like to put accent colours with white. I'm going for the little textured slits on their armour and the weapon bits. A vibrant red contrast all over the white areas to tint them red, and don't worry if you go over any of the green bits by mistake, we can fix that later. Give the forest floor an all over coat of dark green contrast like Dark Angel's green, and if you want you can also use some of this colour, maybe thin down a little bit, to recess shade any of the joints and creases in their armour. Now let's go back to the original bright green we used to touch up any mistakes we made with the red or the dark green wash, a few tiny points of white like the teeth and eyes, and then if you want to add a bit more spice to your larger creatures, you could grab your vibrant yellow again and manually highlight the leaves, and create the illusion of some bristles or thorns on their tails or limbs with little tight streaks of yellow. You can also boost this effect by underlining some of the most prominent yellow streaks with some of the thin dark wash we used a minute ago too. If you want to cheat and make the bases look really overgrown and mossy, you can use Dirty Down Moss, which dries in a really weird matte, very realistic mossy tone. A few sliced up tufts to make the base extra planty, and then all that's left is to paint the base rims. Pow! Super vibrant, wild, native Deathworld Tyranids ready to ambush any humans stupid enough to try to terraform their world. Okay, Hatty, what's scheme number 8?
Blue Lobster. Again, looking at animals for more inspiration, did you know that crustaceans like lobsters and crayfish can get a rare genetic abnormality that makes them vibrant blue? They also have a vibrant pink underside, which I think will make a really cool paint scheme. It feels right to give this one a sandy looking base, so superglue and sand all over, a couple of rocks, and prime the whole thing white. To make the shadows and recesses a bit darker, a quick brown wash all over. Agrax Earthshade will be fine for this. For the pink underbelly, I mixed Volupus Pink and Magos Purple, thinned that mix down a bit to make it more transparent, and painted it on, avoiding all the armour plates. Good old Talassar Blue again for the shell, and then Black Legion for the claws and eyes. Now we can use a warm off-white like Phantom Ivory to gently dry brush all over the model and pick out all the raised details. This will obviously work better on the new Tyranid models as they're packed with crispy edges. You can also pick out extra striations on the armour with the detail brush with the same paint if you want to, but you might want to leave that for the big models and characters. Skeleton Horde contrast paint all over the base to give it a dirty sandy feel. And then after a black rim, you could call your basic troops done. But as an optional final step for your characters, you can thin down a dark blue paint, like Signal Blue here, get some on the end of a toothpick and dab tiny dots all over the carapace. And there we go! A nice simplified version of the blue lobster look. There are so many animals and plants that have such wild colour schemes in real life. Let me know what other animals' colours you think would look good on a Tyranid.
Now then, time for my last scheme. Number 9 is going to be my speed paint take on the updated Leviathan colour scheme, which has shifted a little bit darker and a little bit more rosy than they were before 10th edition. To kick things off, I'm going to file the surface of the base flat, because I think this Hive fleet will look really good with a starship base, kind of like the Xenomorph scheme had. I snipped up a toothpick to look like a big old pipe, glued it down, snipped up some sprue into little chunks, glued them down too, then filled the gaps of superglue with some sand as debris. Sorted. Starting off with a black primer this time, I then dry brushed white over the top of it. As you can see, doing it this way round rather than starting with the white and using a black wash like I did with the 90s style model, it looks much darker and dingier with more shadows. I then used the best named contrast paint, Briar Queen Chill, to paint the body. This is really pale and will actually lighten the recesses too, which is why I left them quite dark. For the carapace, Leviathan Purple, what else? I painted the armour panels on the head, back and legs, and also the body of the weapons too. Not the armour plates on the weapons though. Now I'll mix some Bile Red into the Leviathan Purple to make a really nice jammy colour. Thinned it with about the same amount of water because we want it to be more of a glaze than a contrast paint, and then I painted the top halves of all of the limbs as well as the fleshy cranium with this colour. You can also sink a bit of this into the little splits on their armour and also paint the armour plates on the weapons with this too. I then thinned some Bile Red with lots of water and just gave the very tops of the areas I painted a little touch of this colour to add a bit of red hue. Then I grabbed a nice deep brown paint, something like Gore Grunter Fur will do, and painted the claws and hooves. After that you could call it a day for your troops, especially if you're painting dozens of them, but if you want to make them look a little bit more special, a little bit more like the box art, you can do a couple of extra slightly trickier steps. For starters, we can make the base look a bit more interesting by painting the flat panels and pipes and bits and bobs with dull silver paint. While we wait for that to dry, we can go back to Briar Queen Chill and mix it about 50-50 with white to create a pretty scheme appropriate highlight colour to use on most parts of the Tyranid. Just a quick line or two near the top facing parts of the ridges and musculature on the body. You can do the same with Leviathan Purple too, adding a tiny bit of white to make it lighter, pinky purple, and add some striations to the armour plates. You're not repainting the whole thing here, just reinforcing the already lighter areas that the contrast paint has pulled away from, adding quick texture that makes it look like way more effort was involved. A black wash all over the base to help it look a bit more dark and dingy, and if you have it, it's the perfect place to use Dirty Down Rust. A little splodge here and there, and after a minute or so will have bloomed into a cool rust effect. You can add as much extra detail as you like, just by adding some white to any of the contrast paints we just used. Details on the weapons, extra painted texture on the tails and limbs, whatever you like. And when you're done, just give it a black rim. And there we go! Lightning fast 10th edition Leviathan. If you want your force to look just like the official stuff does, this has you covered. Now over to Hatty for the big finale.
Okay, we're going to get a little bit more strange now. Want to make one of those armies that people remember for years when they play against you? Look no further. Glitter-Nids. I tried this out on a little ghosty model during 2020. I got bored, what can I say? And it's still one of my favourite models to this day. First, I want to make a really strong cracked base with massive cracks, so I painted the base with gloss varnish first to reduce the drag on the paint, and then applied a thick layer of Agrellan Earth. About an hour later, and look at those cracks! I want the body to have a midnight purpley blue look, so I mix Signal Blue with Royal Purple and airbrush this onto the body. You can just brush it on if you like, it'll still look great. Next up, I mixed a bit of Genestealer Purple into Emperor's Children to make an appropriate highlight colour and dry brush the body. Don't bother with the carapace though, because, well, the next step is to just cover it all in glitter anyway. Specifically, body glitter. For some reason, the beauty industry seems to have way more interesting products than scale modelling and arts and crafts. Look at those colours! Add a layer of thin liquid super glue on the shell, and then just sprinkle the glitter on. Rinse and repeat until the shell is all covered. You can use a toothpick to guide the glue into the hard to reach spots as well. And then you just have to tidy up all that glitter from your work surface, and model, and hands, and clothes, and life. You're never going to get all of it though, you'll be finding this for years. Cameras and diffused flat painting lights don't really do this glitter justice, but just look at it when I shine my phone's torch on it. It's so beautiful. A pop of vibrant yellow on the eyes, and then to make the model look extra shiny and extreme, a tiny touch of pure white on the key reflection points on the top sides of the model, shoulders, elbows and cheekbones. And then we add a gloss varnish all over. It'll create the illusion of it looking extra shiny. We're going to paint on a nice solid rich blue on the cracks, and add a couple of vibrant neon alien tufts to finish off this crazy base. A black rim, and it's finished. I'm not gonna lie, it's obviously a little bit different, but it's an absolutely nuts colour scheme. And as I said, people are definitely gonna remember playing against you for probably the rest of their lives. And you'll also be finding that glitter everywhere for the rest of your life.
And there we go. 10 fast, effective and fun paint schemes to inspire you with all of those new Tyranid models that somehow you found yourself with. So now you've seen them all, we want to know 2 things. First off, which one is your favourite that you think you might want to use for your own army? But also, which one should we use for the Midwinter Minis Tyranid army? We've made 2 polls on our community page to choose which of my schemes and also which of Hatty's schemes were your favourite, and then we're going to put the winner of those 2 polls head to head in a poll just for our Patreon supporters. If you want to have a say in the final choice, follow the link in the description and support the channel from just £2 a month. New sign-ups also get a shout out in the video too, so special thanks to our newest members Devin Dunn, Nightly Bear, Laurel Barchi, Lars Heselberg, Christian Lackey, Bill Fatora, Rich Uncle Skeleton, Mike T and Aaron.
And by the way, we've got loads more Tyranid painting tips that you might not have seen already. Our friend Ant made us a video showing how he paints his vibrant synthwave scheme, and we have a video where Guy painted up some really rare resin armor cast models for Ant's birthday with that scheme too.
I also painted up some Gene Stealers in a few different easy schemes which you might also want to check out, and ages ago I experimented with using holographic nail art flakes on the Tyranid's carapace, and it worked surprisingly well. Anyway, links for all that stuff is in the video description. Don't forget to follow the links and check out the fantastic intro deal from NordVPN, and thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.
Bye!